problem. I know we don't have a whole lot of people here, but we're going to go ahead and get started anyway, because we're anxious to have this meeting happen and to listen to Pastor Hawkins. Definitely wanting to listen to him. And I just want to touch bases with everybody. If you could, going to go around and just let everybody know who you are and how you're connected to the HRC. Kevin, I'm starting with you. You have to unmute. There you go.
All right. Well, I'm pleased to have bumped into Mary again after so many years of being separated. It's really been a blessing. When I found out she's got this group going on, it was something that I really was interested in, and I look forward to trying to get more involved and do some stuff instead of just attend the meetings and whatnot, because there's a lot to do in this area of what we stand for.
Very true. Well, thanks, Kevin. I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here. And Gina, how about you? You just introduce yourself?
I need no introduction. No, I'm sorry. Gina Estrin with Citizen Advocates for Seniors and Homeless Solutions, and probably a thorn in everybody's side over the past couple of years. So as you all know, I'm very proactive in trying to help people, and I try and connect with the community as best I can.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Gina. I'm glad you're here. Very glad you're here. And Linda.
Well, hello, everyone. Yeah, as you all know, I'm from Golden Era Productions. I hooked up with Mary, gosh, 10, 12 years ago or something.
Probably 20.
Yeah, maybe 20 now. These last couple of years have been, whoa, baby. Anyway, and I'm very interested in human rights, and Human Relations Council dovetails with that very well. So there are 30 human rights, and most people don't know what they are. So I'm always an advocate to teach people what human rights are and all the human rights that we all have. So that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're with us, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now Malcolm is on incommunicado here. There's no picture and no sound. So we know that he is now probably swearing. There you are. Probably swearing in the.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, you are here. Do they think you're strange?
Start in like 30 seconds.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you're here, Malcolm. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put you on mute again. So I'm going to introduce Brian, and we're going to go forward. Okay. All right. And Pastor Hawkins, I am going to ask you to unmute. And for those, I know that all of you know who Brian is. But my first introduction to Brian was when he and Kevin did a skit for our Black History Month essay contest. Was that 3 years ago, I think? You and members of your church, the Divine Appointment Worship Center, which was absolutely a wonderful skit. And it was really important. It was important to the kids who saw it. And I think it was even more important to the grown-ups who saw it. So I'm very, very glad you're with us tonight. As all of you know, we had a speaker last month who spoke about critical race theory. And so Malcolm has invited Brian to be here and talk about the other side of it. This is not a political issue. I mean, it can be a political issue. We're not talking about the politics of it. This is his view of critical race theory. And so I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Brian. Go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm honored to be here. I definitely appreciate the invite. When I think about that skit that Kevin and, members of my church did, it was almost like it was an answer to 2020. Had people watch the skit all the way to the end, because it was, we always, can look at the problems, but then at the end of the day, there was a solution to it. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be talking about that here tonight at the San Jacinto Unified School District Board meeting. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about, the famous quote, "It takes a village," because we often, say that quote, but then we don't really move forward with it. What does it really mean that it takes a village? Well, everybody that lives within the valley needs to collectively come together. I used to say, lift up the piece that you walk on, and that's where I want to begin this with, picking up the piece that you walk on. Critical race theory, it's become a very, very sensitive conversation over the last couple of years. I mean, really within the last 2 years or so, although it's been around for a while. I was sharing with someone the other day, 80% of the actual study I'm fine with, because the ideal of it is studying history. These accounts in history happened. Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. That decision happened. That's not a made up court decision. The problem I have with it is the opinions after it. When you look at something and, it's like arguing the mental intent of someone's responsible, to say, how do I know how a person was thinking or if this was derived from? The missing part of it, because if you always look at one side, it goes back to that quote, "It takes two to tango." If you always look at everything, from one-sided, you're never going to get to a part of healing or unity. It's fine. To always say one person is responsible or a collection of people is responsible. That quote, "It takes two to tango." I'm listening to Kevin, knowing that he's giving advice on marriage, and even listening to Malcolm, couples can sit down and blame the husband or blame the wife, but at the end of the day, there's parts that both parties take a part in this, and that's in anything in life. To just say that one person is, ultimately responsible is not fair. Today, I got a privilege of going to listen to the student of the month, and there was this one kid in particular who wants to go to school and become a prosecutor. And he wants to become a prosecutor based off of his 21-year-old sister was killed by a drunk driver, and how it affected him, because there was no, anybody who's ever had someone, get arrested or know someone who's died in a car accident from drunk driving, that, it's definitely not a life sentence. There's laws. I had a friend of mine whose sister, she was pregnant at the time. She was 9 months pregnant. The baby was due to be born it happened right over in Devonshire, Hemet. And the law said that because the child wasn't born, then they only can charge her with her death, and so this young man, I bring that up because this young man was affected by that circumstance, and that situation affected him, and it pushed him to want to become a prosecutor. I bring that up because, you hear society saying that the effects of slavery, right? You hear that a lot, the effects of slavery. What you don't hear is that, especially in the African-American history, and you can go and do your research, the African-American community actually economically was better after slavery than what it is now. Post-slavery, in 1906, O.W. Gurley went and bought 40 acres of land in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and built what was known as, Black Wall Street. Subsequently, it was burned down in 1921. But what people don't talk about is what happened in 1922. They actually started to rebuild, and he moved and went to, North Carolina and built the same thing. And so a lot of times we don't hear that in history. We always hear the negative downsides of it. And a lot of times we always want to focus on that. And that's where I think critical race theory goes wrong at, is that it focuses so much on just one element, one aspects of it. The sad part about it is that the people who are studying it, right? Because it talks about one of the tenets in critical race theory is implicit bias. The people who are studying it and the people who are teaching it now has a bias, and you can't say you don't. And that's the sad thing about its teaching, to sit up here and suggest that someone, sit up here and suggest that someone doesn't have a bias, and you're leaving that part out, to say that, hey, you have a bias, but I have a prejudice. I'm prejudiced teaching you about your bias, and I think that that's just so unfair, and that's the missing element of it. Like to go in and say it's all your fault, but then you're not looking at even now, for years in the African American community, we used to talk about the Willie Lynch letter. And if you go into the Black community and ask about the Willie Lynch letter, many people will quote it. As a matter of fact, if you go and look up the movie Great Debater with Denzel Washington, he even quotes the Willie Lynch letter in this movie. He talks about it. This was a huge impact in the Black community, and so much that we said the negative effects of the Willie Lynch letter is what divided the Black community. You go and say, well, why the Black community is so divided? Many older, educated, or many, Black individuals, they'll say, oh, it's the result of the Willie Lynch letter. And what the Willie Lynch letter was, is that there was a man by the name of William Lynch who was brought in to train other slave owners how to break slaves. And then it would put other slaves against other slaves, light-skinned slaves against Black slaves. And, it's so much. Well, guess what? With the emergence of history and technology, some people say Willie Lynch never even existed. They said that there's no truth that he ever even lived. However, that legend, that myth has been passed along for generations, and individuals have believed it and have accepted it. And so now if he never existed, then why is there division? Because we've been passing this story along and allowing that to be the narrative on why we're divided. I always tell people, man, be careful of the stuff that you say out of your mouth. People start going around saying, all caps are bad, or all cops are bastards, that ACAB statement. So you have people who've never even had a negative encounter with law enforcement, never even got a jaywalking ticket. And all of a sudden, they're now, angry at police. All white people are racist. All white people are rich. All white people got, 700 credit scores. All white people, own slaves. And now you're going around, you're buying into this theory, this opinion, and because it's being taught to you, you're accepting it as your own reality. You're accepting it as your truth. And that's the dangers of this teaching, because it's filled with so much opinion. It's filled with so much, ideas that this is possible. Could this be possible? The intent, to say that, oh, the only reason why, white people get involved in things because it's what they call interest convergent, that it only interests them. Well, guess what? That's all of society. Most people don't do stuff unless it interests them too. But now we're painting this picture that it solely falls on, I'm not going to sit up here and just go somewhere if I'm not interested in going. There's a purpose behind it. There's a reason behind it. Now, because I'm seeking unity, there's a reason why I do the things that I do. And I think that it's unfair to draw to a conclusion, right, that one, racism is everywhere, to say that people are inherently racist. There's a thing called likes and dislikes. If I don't like you, it don't mean I'm racist. That just means I don't want to be around you. I just particularly don't subscribe to hanging around you. We got to get back to society where it's okay to not be liked by everybody or to not need everyone's approval. And that's the sad thing about where we're at now. And it's almost as though we're teaching this theory to say no one can have options. No one can have, whatever they prefer. And it's it's going into the verge now to where it's going to cancel out the excitement as we know it. It almost reminds me of the movie Demolition Man, where they kind of like got rid of everything, no sports, no cussing, no physical touch, and everybody would just walk around extremely bland. And then, some old criminals from back in the day showed up and wreaked havoc. And that's what's going to end up happening, because you got people who are not tolerating this, and the teaching is so wrong about it. If nothing was wrong with critical race theory, if there was no issue with it, why are so many people adamant about it that it's not being taught? That's your first question. Why are so many people adamant about it not being taught? Like I said, I have no problem with 80% of it's, to study something. If I could get laughed at all the kids. Sorry. To study something. I think that we should study history.
Thank you. Yep. Yep. Got a hold it for the baby. I tried telling some parents the whole way to stay.
Oh yeah.
Like important issues.
Yeah, when I look at this, the ideal of it. Sorry.
Are you in Zoom right now? Have a good night.
Are you leaving?
Yeah, I got.
Oh, because you got to go to your school.
It's
Okay.
starting in 5 minutes.
All right. I'll talk with you later.
Yeah, if anyone can give me an update.
Okay, I will. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, it probably would have been better if I would have been in my office, but I didn't realize that when I told Malcolm I'll come on and speak, that it was the same night as a school board meeting. And it's extremely super packed in here. Yeah, I think it's the second wave of kids. So they do like a little song and all the kids singing and everything. All right, my man. You too. Yes, ma'am. You guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Give me 1 second. All the kids.
Eventually, one day.
Good, good.
Hello. You saying really good tonight, Lily?
Smarties. Bye. Okay.
I don't know. Nah, just all the kids. Like if I showed you, like all the kids are like leaving. Nah, they were packed in there.
I guess so.
They were extremely packed in there.
Well, Brian, if you'd like to, we can kind of wrap up just the speaking portion of it, but I could ask and see if anybody has got any questions for you.
Yeah. If anybody have any questions, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Do you have anything,
All right, I have a
Kevin?
question.
Go ahead,
um,
Kevin.
Brian, you started off by saying that there's one there was one idea, one element, one aspect of CRT that you didn't like. Because it focuses on one element or one aspect. And what is that one element or one aspect?
It's the opinion, the theory part. So what drives to the opinion, because essentially what they did was they, because critical race theory was a law class. So essentially they took cases, historical cases. That's why I mentioned Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. All right, so they took historical cases, especially, think of To Kill a Mockingbird, right? So
Right.
they took historical cases, and essentially looked at it and arrived to at a racist type of ending to it, dismissing the facts that the elements surrounding those cases was during a period of time when America had its issues with racism. I mean, here it is, 1954. This is Jim Crow South, segregation, racial tension. There's so many different things about it, but the part that I have the issue with is coming to the opinion of, when I derived at the tenets of critical race theory. When I look at, like I said, interest conversion, is saying that the only reason why Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, because they took one part out of the quote that he spoke in the New York Times or the New York Post when he said that if I could preserve the Union without freeing the slaves, I would. But then he also goes to say that if I can preserve the Union with freeing half the slaves, I would. He said, and then he goes on to say, if I can preserve the Union with freeing the slaves, I would. So there's a full quote to that. And that's the problem. All we hear is because he understood how divided America was in 1863, when he gave this quote to the New York Post. It was the same conversation that was happening in 1776 when they were drafting the Declaration of Independence. Slavery was talked about in that room. There were founding fathers who were against slavery, but at the same time, too, they knew that there were founding fathers. They knew that there were individuals who were supportive of slavery.
Right.
And so the conclusion was drawn is, hey, are we going to argue about slavery, or are we going to argue about our freedom from Britain? And that's where, when you read Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist Papers, he knew that a civil war was going to eventually happen, because at some point they knew that slavery was inhumane. And he knew that some of his, constituents in the South were not in favorable of that. Yeah. Right. So to suggest that America was founded on racism, or that, you leave out so many different parts of the conversation, because not everybody in the room wanted to see blacks as slaves.
Yeah.
And so, but you're picking the parts that you hated, and you're magnifying that. I'm not gonna bring in the other witnesses. It's like for instance, in Christianity, right? You got 12 disciples. Judas, right? When Jesus put the bread before him and said, one of you are going to betray me, the disciples was like, is it me? So they even felt like they could have been guilty of it. You know what I mean? And then it's like to go and write Christianity based on Judas and say, oh man, all Christians is thieves. All Christians is about to betray Christ. So now I'm about to paint a brushstroke over all Christians and identify them as all as Judas, when less than 4% of whites owned slaves during the height of the slave trade. 96% of white Americans did not own slaves. However, this theory is based on 4%, less than 4%. And now we're arguing, what about the whites who helped with the Underground Railroad? What about the whites who were hung, who lost their property, who were beaten, right? But we're going to focus and say, oh, well, all white people is racist. Even Martin Luther King, and it's so crazy because a lot of people was like, oh, well, Martin Luther King would have been down with critical race theory. No, he would have not, Well, where's your proof? It's in the I Have a Dream speech. Because so many of us want to quote, judge a man by the color of his skin, not the contents of his character. However, if you read that same speech, he literally says, don't allow your thirst for freedom to allow you to drink from a cup of bitterness. And then he goes on to say, be wary, be careful of militant Negro groups that forges an attack against all white people, for they have their destiny woven within ours. So he even warns individuals of, of BLM, if you want to say, because there was a group in the 1960s called the SDS Weathermen. And if you go and you look up, there's a video with Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, Illinois. If you go and type in the YouTube video, Fred Hampton and the SDS Weatherman, it's on YouTube. He's being interviewed by a reporter. And the reporter asks him, hey, man, do you support SDS Weatherman? And if you would have bleeped it out and said, hey, man, do you support Black Lives Matter? Listen to how he describes SDS Weatherman. And then you're going to hear everything that what Black Lives Matter was doing last year. It's going to sound identically the same. So that just lets me know, history finds its way of repeating itself.
Yes.
So that would be the issue that I have, that ending factor to the findings of critical race theory that just ends it off with just, pointing the blame and saying, okay, all white people are racist. Okay, but there's some angry Black folks out there too.
Yes.
And a lot of this narrative, a lot of this teaching is being accepted by a lot of, Black folks who feel like because it's almost like, you got to think about it from this perspective. In the Black community, you've been, and remember I was saying about the Willie Lynch letter, okay? So imagine being taught, that white people got an advantage. Imagine being taught that, white people, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, these scholars and these professors come out with this theory, right? That it's almost like validating what you've been taught for all these years. So now you got individuals, it's like it's feeding into an anger that was made up, to think that, not one white person that don't know anything about a struggle, to think that not one white person know what it's like to, be on welfare or to, to be divorced or to have a father leave. Like that's only common in the Black community. Like it's exclusively saying Black issue, like Black traumas is unique. You know what I mean? And
so I think what I think you're saying is you take issue with the fact that a major tenet of CRT is that everybody's got some racism in them all the time.
no, it's not everybody has some racism in them all the time. Because I mean,
Well, but how would you say this
Well, yeah,
premise
because that
of
would be
CRT doesn't agree with you?
Yeah. So that right there, that's one of the tenets I don't agree with. That everyone is inherently racist.
Right.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree that all white people are inherently racist.
What I'm hearing you say is that what you want is for history to be balanced, to be true.
Right.
Not just balanced so that it's like one of this and one of this, but you just want it to be true.
Right. Like you don't have to give. It's kind of like, it's kind of like when they make these, like they turn. Have you ever read a book and they turned it into a movie?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you hated the fact that they did that because they ruined your book?
Yep.
Right. And that's what we have, instead of just letting history be told. Like if you don't have the missing parts of it, you don't have to embellish your theory to it. There's parts in the Bible that don't have the full stories to it. It'll say Jesus, walked down the mountain. Next, he's on a boat. And then you sort of say, well, he got on the boat by walking to the pier and, casting a net and pulling a boat in, or he went and chopped down a tree and, he built a boat from, majestic wood in the Jerusalem forest or something like that. So now I'm trying to create, what I'm thinking he was doing, you know, and that's the thing about it. You know, we're taking history and saying, well, when these guys did it, this is what they was thinking because they're white, and this is how white people think. You know, this is what was on their mind when they were thinking like that. You know, and to draw
Okay,
that
I see your point and Mary's point. What I liked about CRT was it advocated teaching the truth of history, not whitewashing the slavery,
right,
not whitewashing
and
the Native American genocide. They write these history books to make the dominant culture look a little more clean than they really were. But at the same time, we have to look out for what you said is them laying that wide coat of racism on everyone.
Right, you know what I mean? Because you're leaving out, you're like, because there's so much more to it, right? So let's go before England. Let's go before the British colonized America, right? There was some savagery that was going on in this country.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's look at this. So to automatically assume that, oh, you know, white people introduced violence. I believe I heard somebody make that comment once. You know, there was savagery going on in Africa. You know, there were tribal wars going on in Africa. So it's not like the British introduced violence. It's not like the British created violence. Violence was happening all over. That's not nothing new that was established. You see what I'm saying? And my thing is, okay, so now if we're going to teach history, and I get it, we're going to teach history, but we shouldn't teach history in a way to now we're looking at people in a hateful and a vengeful way, because it's creating an unnecessary anger, right? To where now people say, well, look what your people did to my people. So now somebody about to jeopardize their future on history that was even written. And you're about to write your history down the drain because you can't, build from that. I love hearing stories. There was a story of a mom who went to the courthouse, and it was a guy who had killed her son. And she went to the courthouse on the day he was about to be sentenced. And she told the guy who killed her son that I forgive you and I'm praying for you. And our family, we love you. And I don't want you to feel any hard feelings to thinking that our family think the worst about you. And that right there changed everything.
Absolutely.
That changed everything. When you can open up a window of healing and forgiveness, and that's the part about it. Nobody's offering healing. Nobody's offering a window, a bridge to be forgiven.
Right. I tell you what, Brian, I'm gonna see if there's one more question, maybe briefly, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up. Does anybody have a question? Gina?
Yes. You mentioned bias versus
Prejudice.
Yeah. How do you distinguish between the two? I mean, what's the dividing line?
Well, it's not so much distinguishing between the two, but one of the tenets of critical race theory is uncovering implicit bias, right? It's essentially saying that white people have a bias that they're not even aware of. You know what I mean? Your color blindness. All right. Now, if we're willing to accept that, then you have to be willing to, on the other end, of saying that there's some Black folks that has prejudice towards white people.
Yes.
And that's my thing. So don't come in saying that, hey, you're biased, but then I know I'm prejudiced. Because then where are we finding the healing at? Where are we finding, well, I can tell you that because you're both prejudiced, I can tell you judging me before you getting to know me. And we all have a little bit of that. We all, I think sometimes we can look at prejudice as a negative thing, but it all depends on, if you form a negative opinion on someone based off of it. You know, a lot of us prejudge, because the word prejudice, a lot of us prejudge things before, we do that in relationships. We do that in, in food and restaurants. We can prejudge things based off of smell. Oh, I bet you this is not going to taste good. So you already develop a prejudice towards it. But then, be willing to address it. Now, sometimes you can reserve and you can hold your prejudice that you have towards something, which can be a unique thing too. I'm gonna reserve my rights to have an opinion on something before I find out about, and that's rare quality.
Yeah,
that's a rare quality. I mean, they say that even in a job interview. I forgot what the percent is, 70, maybe 60, 70% of the job interview is based off of when you walk in. So you've already developed a prejudice about someone when they walked in. Never knowing what somebody's circumstances is before they got there. So.
Right. Very true.
The hard part is to separate your own personal past experiences. They color everything that comes in the future. And
you said, how do I do what?
Huh?
How do I separate?
Well, I'm not saying, I wasn't asking, I was just kind of pointing out that part of the problem in general is that people kind of react according to what their experiences are, even though they're experiencing something new and different. Just like you mentioned, you smell something, you automatically make a judgment. They've experienced something that hurt them or whatever, and they carry it forward to how they react in the future. And it's very rare that people can stop for a minute and think, wait a minute, I'm basing this on something that's gone and done, and this is a new thing. To recognize that difference. And we're at that, I think right now, we're at that critical transition point where people need to be aware that what we've heard in the past, and again, heard versus what you've experienced.
Well, a lot of people are learning history for the first time.
And
right?
especially now there's new information coming forward too.
Very true. Very true.
There was a gentleman, it was a documentary I was watching, and he grew up white. He's a white gentleman, and his family owned a plantation. And his grandmother used to tell him stories. He was like, oh, because he found out that his family owned slaves. And he said that when, slaves were emancipated, that, his family, set them free, but because the way his family treated them, treated the slaves, that they didn't want to leave, that they wanted to stay there and work. And so they grew up working there. Well, he found out later on that that's not what happened. He found out that when the slaves tried to leave, that his family slaughtered them all and everything like that. So he learned a whole different story, than what he was taught by his own grandmother. You know? So, my thing is, and this is where we're missing one of the biggest elements, is how it affects someone, and like they say, you can't tell someone how they're supposed to feel, and you can't tell someone because everybody receive things differently. And I think that's the missing part. Like you're saying, well, just get over it. To someone, some people need closure. Some people need healing. Some people need, an answer. I used to tell people in relationships, like, do you want to go and ask the person why they left you? Because is there really an answer that's good enough for you? You definitely didn't want to hear it's not you, it's me. That's the worst answer. You know what I mean? And so, but let me get in because it looked like they're about to call me to go speak.
Okay.
But, I appreciate.
Well, I tell you what, Brian, we appreciate you being here so much tonight.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate you coming, talking to us, answering our questions. And we're very happy that you were here. And Malcolm, I see you there, and we're saying goodbye to Brian. Okay.
Yeah,
Take care.
It was good.
Yeah, it was excellent. It was excellent. Thank you so much. All right, you take care.